Hey everyone, I'm Hils Walton and you're tuned into the Digital Culture Ideas podcast and YouTube show. Today we have a powerhouse guest, Scott McLiver, partner in Digital Dynamo at PwC. He's also the Asia-Pac Gen AI leader and sits on the Global Gen AI Leadership Council at PwC. So Scott's a little bit like the Tony Stark of the business world, in my opinion. So he's got this really uncanny ability to infuse innovation into every nook and cranny of a company, whether it's AI-driven customer service or blockchain-powered supply chain. So Scott's your go-to guy. So Scott, how are you?
I'm great, Hils. It's great to be here. I feel a little bit, I'm not sure I can live up to that very, very kind introduction, but thank you. I'll do my best.
Well, I always like to kind of talk about people's superpowers, and those are the ones that they picked out for you. But it actually might help if you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and, your background, just to set the scene a bit.
Absolutely. So I'm a partner at PwC. As you mentioned, I lead the generative AI effort for Asia Pacific. I've been a partner with the firm for a number of years. I certainly feel very old now when I see some of the new grads coming in. I've been with PwC for over 20 years now and a partner for about 12. I was originally in the private business team, and whilst I still have some involvement with a core group of clients, most of my time for the last 7 or 8 years has been spent around emerging technology and digital innovation. And that's ranged from building some products within PwC that we've taken to market, digital products, all the way through to helping clients understand emerging technology. That has tended to be in the digital asset space or the AI space. We certainly built some AI tools, including a machine learning cash flow coach about 5 or 6 years ago when AI wasn't as popular, wasn't as sexy. But now obviously in recent, couple of years, this Gen AI wave has been fantastic in helping organizations take seriously the productivity gains that can come from this amazing tech. So now I spend probably most of my time helping PwC themselves, so us as a firm or our clients, harness the power of generative AI. And where that is, the reason I say both us and our clients is, we think of ourselves as client zero. We're client number one because we need to help ourselves before we can credibly help others.
Absolutely, because just if we get some example of the size of the business. So how many people in ANZ for PwC? What's the number of employees that you're sort of rolling out these different AI tools to?
Yeah, there's circa 2,000 in New Zealand and around 6,000 to 7,000 in Australia. So probably in Australia and New Zealand, we're talking circa 10,000 of our team. And then across Asia Pacific, we're sort of 40 to 50,000.
So well placed to then advise customers on what to do when you're actually dealing with, large numbers of staff using AI themselves.
We're certainly getting some, we're certainly getting a lot of learnings on the way, because anything that's just new and innovative, the best way to learn is by doing. And that's certainly the approach that we're taking.
Awesome. And so perhaps we'll get into that in a bit, but I do just want to focus on you for a little bit longer, just in terms of your career. So obviously quite a long career in PwC and definitely the technology space. Tell us a bit about that. So for people who might be looking to get into that sort of career, what were some of the challenges you faced in your carear? How did you overcome them? That sort of thing. What kind of lessons have you learned as you've progressed?
Yeah, so I whilst I've got a very technology and emerging tech innovation focused role now, which is often viewed by a number of the team, how did you get into that, Scott? It certainly wasn't something that I joined the firm as. I joined as a accounting grad, but I was always really passionate around tech. So even in my university holidays, I had a role in the technology team at Canon, New Zealand. So I was on their IT. They actually rolled out Windows 95 during some of those summers. So ever since joining, all my life I've been tech, a bit of a geek, really passionate around new technology and, loving gadgets. And I suppose the reason I mention that is that curiosity and, passion for technology meant that even in the first 10 or 15 years of my career, as more of a typical business advisor, accountant, I actually often had responsibility for technology products or technology initiatives, maybe. So I just kept drifting more and more into technology. And one example of that would be in my sort of second or third year at PwC, I was sent to Brisbane and I built the New Zealand version of a financial reporting tool called Value Financials, which helps large organisations to do their financial statements. Now, it amazingly, and I only say amazingly because the amount of disruption that exists in the world, it's still a really fantastic tool that still operates today. Fortunately, my version, Hils, has long since been made obsolete. We've had about 25, 30 new versions since, but ever since then, around software and kind of, I guess, the accounting and finance space, I was always quite involved with. So that just slowly more and more led to me being involved in technology. And now, the last 6 or 7 years, that's been much more of a formal role, leading our digital products business and our emerging tech offering.
So really what I'm hearing is if people are interested in careers in technology, then it's about actually leaning into it, whether you think you've got a technology background or not, maybe seeking out those projects or those, and even internal initiatives that come up and giving them a go.
Absolutely. Look, absolutely. I think that, curiosity, passion, enthusiasm, and hard work, I think it's really hard, it's really hard to beat an enthusiastic, curious person, right? The opportunities and the places that their career can go to is often through curiosity, and passion, and be enthusiastic. So around tech initiatives, that was always me. And next thing you know, I'm doing a role that I love, but I never thought I would have ended up here. So be passionate and enthusiastic and follow your curiosity for things that interest you, because it's much easier, I think, to do a good job of things that genuinely interest you.
Yeah, that's very true. And so now, obviously, you're doing a lot in the generative AI space, and that's how we connected, basically, in terms of educating people around generative AI and letting them know what it is and kind of bringing them on the journey. But I'm keen, for example, let's say you were tasked with implementing AI into a business in 6 months. Give me a rundown on what you would be thinking about and what you would be doing, like maybe month by month or whatever format works for you. But how should a business that perhaps hasn't done it yet or they're thinking about it, how should they launch into, generative AI in their business?
Yeah, great question.
Big question.
It's a big question, but actually it's one that we deal with every day, right? So I do have a view on this at the moment. And look, we've got a 5-step process that we think really gives you a good mental model to start the journey, right? So step one, and I increasingly believe in this more and more and more, step one has to be executive and business leader education, right? Mm-hmm. Until you get the leaders of your business, and not just the CEO, not just the business owner, you have to get the leadership. They've got to be upskilled. If there's not a foundational knowledge of this new technology, then it's really hard to proceed to the stage of strategic discussion. So step one is absolutely executive education and leadership education. And on that
why do you think all the executives, just sort of cutting into that a little bit, why do you think all the executives need to be upskilled rather than just a couple? Can you go into that a bit more?
Because you can't have the strategy discussion because the upskilling is just so that they can then contribute to the strategy discussion, right? So, and that's certainly what I've found that without that foundational knowledge, because that's just the table stakes, and I think that one of the challenges that business leaders have got, I personally see this most days, unfortunately, there's not a one-pager. There's no one-pager for AI, Gen AI, just like there wasn't a one-pager for the internet in 95, 96, 97, right? You're going to have to learn about this new technology. You're going to have to be curious, and you're going to have to try some things. And probably in the last 20, 25 years, maybe 30 years, there hasn't been a technology which is so fundamentally different and needing of kind of roll your sleeves up and understand it like Gen AI, right? Since the internet has been established, we've kind of had a lot of change, but most of it's been relatively easy to, for leaders to wrap their head around and maybe get the one pager. This is different. This is human cognitive tasks being taken off humans where necessary to help us be phenomenally more productive. And at its core, that is such a transformational idea. business leaders need to understand enough of it so that they can then go to step 2 of the 5-step journey, which is the strategy discussion. So the next step is, okay, now that you understand Gen AI, what it is and why it's so transformational, what does that mean for us? So businesses need to then stop and think, okay, are we an industry or a business that needs to take some risks here? Because some do. Some businesses and some sectors, they can't be slow with Gen AI. They'll get steamrolled by this tech and their competitors. And if you're in one of those sectors, you're going to have to move faster. But it's always easy to move fast if you've acknowledged you've got to move fast, because you know that you'll make some mistakes and you know that you'll have to have things not quite as perfect in some areas. And the example I would give is, let's think of the internet, right? So the internet's a great analogy for a lot of tech adoption. If you were in online, if you're in media and a newspaper, you couldn't really be a slow adopter of that tech, right? If you were in, banking and finance, the internet changed you, sure, but it didn't disrupt your business model, right? And that's where you need to stop and think as a group of business leaders, how much is this tech coming at my industry and our business? And so basically the purpose of stage 2 is to determine how fast do we need to move and how much risk appetite do we have, right? If you're in agriculture or maybe hospitality, as an example, those two sectors, there's no question Gen AI will be a phenomenal force in the long term, but I don't think they're at the front of the queue of disruption challenge, right, around agriculture and hospitality, whereas there's a whole bunch of industries around knowledge work which are going to be much, much more impacted by Gen AI. So that stage 2 strategic discussion is around, as leaders, okay, now that we understand this, how much is it going to impact us? What part of our business is going to impact the most? And therefore, how much do we have to lean into this change? Can we be fast followers, or do we need to take some risks and move early? That's the key part of stage 2.
Okay, so in those strategy discussions that you have, do you think it's also one reason why a lot more people in the organization have to be kind of schooled up on AI is because it affects every business unit? It's not just the organization, it's the HR team, the marketing team. Like, there's some fundamental rethinking of organizational processes and ways of doing things. So absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Those business leaders can't have that strategy discussion about the whole organization unless they're mostly all on the same page.
Look, absolutely right. And totally. And that's where Mark Cuban, the Dallas Mavericks owner and billionaire tech investor from the US, there's a great quote that I often use of his in some of the intros that if you're a CEO, you have to understand AI. It will affect every single part of your business, period. Right? Yeah. Now, it's because of your point there, Hils, is that if you have human brain power and cognitive effort helping your business, AI's in there. There's no part of your business, unless you're saying, okay, we don't use human brain power, therefore AI doesn't matter. Sure, that's fine. But if you're using human brain power in a part of your business, the potential to use AI to supercharge that human is phenomenal. So that's why everyone's got to understand it so they can challenge each other, because the reality is there's no, I guess, paint by numbers playbook. You need smart people who know the business, who know those sectors, as you've mentioned, who can debate the relative impact that Gen AI is going to have. So that strategy discussion helps you figure out, are we going to be fast? Are we take some risk? We're going to move a little bit slower, but we will get started. But you determine how hard you're going to run at the start. And then you move on to step 3, which is basically deploying the appropriate risk and governance frameworks, because we've decided to get started. We've determined our risk appetite. So let's now get some governance in place and some frameworks before we actually arm our people with the AI. And that just means you've really got to put some governance. Microsoft, you guys have led the way in your organization, Hils, around, being a real advocate for ethical use of AI. Certainly in PwC, we talk a lot about responsible AI. Doesn't matter how large or small your organization is, you need to have a framework and some processes to manage the risks associated with unintended use. right? So just like you will have, any organization will have have processes and procedures and risk frameworks around a lot of their business. AI is one of them. So you have to implement some of those frameworks. They don't have to be overly cumbersome and onerous, but you've got to have people responsible. Who's responsible for signing off our use cases? Who's thinking about the way we're using it in an ethical forum? So put some risk processes in place, and then you get onto stage 4, Hils, where the fun begins, and I suppose the hard work begins, which is deploying the technology to your people. You've got to start a pilot, right? So it doesn't matter whether you start with 10 people or a pilot like we did of 200, right? You've got to get the kind of the first milestone is you do step 1, 2, and 3, which is, executive education, strategy discussion, and then governance and risk frameworks. But stage 4, deploy the tech, and you've got to get into the hands of your smart people so they can use this technology to explore and be curious. How does it help me supercharge my role? How can I use this in my day-to-day job, right? And that's the pilot phase. That's an iterative phase, because once you get it in the hands of your people, you need to. We would bring our people together that were on the pilot every week. They'd spend time together every week sharing what worked well, what didn't work well. And that was a week after week after week process. And, there's some real gems that come from smart people stopping and sharing how the previous week using GPT-4 worked. So that was really powerful. And then the last stage of the process, the 5 steps, is full scale. So how do you then scale it to your wider team? So we did that a few months ago. As you know, Hils, we've now got all of our people in New Zealand, about 1,800, have got Gen AI in their hands, and that's a huge people change effort. And I honestly feel like stage 5 is kind of the start line of, I guess, game number 2, which is actually getting the best out of this tech for your whole organization. And that's where those 5 steps get you started, but you're going to have a multi-year journey, in my opinion, on leveraging this technology. Because if I think about another tool that's close to any finance person's heart, is Excel, right? So that's a great. We've spent 30 or 40 years, let's say 30 years as a profession and society, learning how to get the best out of Excel. I mean, you've only got to go into any organization to see the mountain of Excel sheets, right? And we are 2, 3, or 4 months into getting the best out of Gen AI. And I often remind some of my colleagues that, it took us years to create those amazing, clever discounted cash flow formulas, those VLOOKUP functionality. Like, Excel is just one tool that we've had decades of learning. Gen AI is going to be the same.
I loved your idea around having that POC. I think that's really important. We do talk about that at Microsoft as well. I think there's some quirks with that POC, because I think you need to bring them on as kind of safe, almost user testing of it, because you talked about how Gen AI is so experimental. And was that your consideration with your POC as well? Like, let's bring on some trusted people to give us some feedback, and if it's not working, or if it's finding information it shouldn't, then there's a responsibility to let you know, so you can close that potential issue down and make it better. Because there is this, that's the thing with it is very experimental. You've got to tweak, change it, and that's not working, try it again, give it another go. Was that something that you considered with yours?
Yeah, so look, it's a good point. I think that's worth sharing. I suppose there's something very ingrained in a professional services firm like PwC, and there'll be lots of others that are similar to us. We have inbuilt countless checks and balances. So what that meant was, when we armed our people with Gen AI, they just used it, but they still went through every single human check and balance. Yeah. Right. So we didn't have to create new checks and balances because of Gen AI, because ultimately nothing leaves our firm without a partner reading every word, right? So that meant correct, for the sign off. So that meant that actually when we had our POCs and our people exploring, they were exploring how can we use this to be more efficient? How can we use this to for efficiency, for quality, but ultimately we had those frameworks still in place. If you're not an organization which is anchored around, I guess services and quality review, you are going to have to think exactly to your point, Hils. What are the checks and balances we have on our POC to make sure that, we capture areas that we don't want to carry on using Gen AI for, or just those learnings. So you're totally right that when you're doing a POC, you're just experimenting. What are the business processes that we do that this tech might help for? And the truth is you don't know till you try.
That's so interesting how your culture actually was really conducive to working with Gen AI and testing it to make sure it's right before, an output goes out the door. I hadn't thought of that, but of course, that's what your people would naturally be doing as part of their roles, and they're just naturally doing it over this, with a new tool. That's
Look,
awesome.
Absolutely. And I think that is why we are, us and organizations like us are a little bit unique, that, the proof of concept and the experimentation is a little bit easier. Whereas if you're, to take your point to the extreme, deploying a proof of concept chatbot in a customer facing organization is quite different, right? You need months of testing before you unleash it on customers, right? So that's where organizations think of, I think, front office, middle office, back office, right? And the back office and middle office use, that's ripe to do POCs, because you've got humans beside it, just seeing how you can leverage this tech to be more efficient. I know we, and we'll probably get onto this later on, Hils. When we look forward into the future, who knows where this is heading? It'll be an exciting discussion, and our geeks, I guess, like you and I, love thinking about that. For now, I genuinely think the foreseeable future in the next 5 years, this is all around supercharging humans, right? Like the ability for this technology to really supercharge. And you mentioned the superhero. It's going to make all humans superheroes, this technology. And that's incredibly powerful, right? Who knows where we get to in 20 years, but the next 5 years, humans are never going to be more productive than I think what Gen AI will allow in the coming 5 to 10 years.
My team and I were discussing that today, because we feel, so Microsoft has had our version, Copilot, for a wee while now. I'd say about a year probably for some of the people in New Zealand. And we're noticing that we're doing a lot of work. Like there isn't 50% of our work that we're not doing anymore. And so now we're kind of cruising around, on our laurels, or, playing more golf or whatever. It seems like we're attending more meetings, doing more work. Like we are, that supercharging the human ability really relates to me in terms of what you're saying. But it's almost like you're doing more work, but there's a balance in terms of getting used to that, or are we focusing on the right things, even though we're doing more work. There's more meetings we can attend, because we can get all these meeting recaps, so I can effectively attend a meeting, but I can also follow 2 or 3 others. Like it's a lot. I
think just an observation I make. I mean, I agree with you. There's a great example that I think applies to what you're touching on there. So take programming. So computer programming with GitHub Copilot and just Gen AI generally is it's one of the near silver bullets, I think, that exists in the Gen AI space. Like its ability to enhance the efficiency of computer programming is phenomenal, right? However, here's how it's playing out where I'm seeing it. Let's say you've got a team of, and I'll just, to keep it simple, 10 developers, that you arm them with GitHub Copilot, and that allows them to be 50% more efficient. Yeah. What I'm finding in every single case is not that the organization is halving their dev talent, they're doubling the speed of their roadmap, right? So the efficiency that's being gained is all going towards more demand, products advancing quicker. So, the output has doubled, but we're using that for a competitive advantage.
Yeah, that's what I'm noticing as well. Supercharging human abilities. What other trends do you see on the AI horizon, if you like, as you're looking out to the future?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the biggest things that's going to change is our ability to use Gen AI. So ultimately, these large language models are incredible, right? Like it is really phenomenal to think that these computer scientists have created a digital version of a human brain, certainly a digital brain. And whilst it doesn't work exactly like our brain, the neural network mimics our cognitive ability, and it's just getting better and better and better. But there's some real weaknesses that as humans, we've got to help it overcome. And I think this is something, Hils, that I see almost one of the biggest hurdles for the average person to get over when they're using Gen AI to even vaguely get the best out of it. When you're dealing with Copilot or, ChatGPT or any tool, you need to realize that whilst it might have the knowledge of 50 PhDs embedded in that language model, they are PhDs locked in a dark room and have got no idea where you are, what you're doing, or any context about you. If you don't give them context, how can they possibly help you as best they can? So the more you think of giving these models context, you will be amazed how good their answers can be. And I think that in a few years, we will talk about how incredible Gen AI has become because the models will get better. But I think a big part of that amazement will be driven from the fact that we will have actually just got better at using it, right? So context, we talk about prompting and prompt engineering a lot, in society now, and prompt engineers are a very sought after skill set. I certainly underestimated that for a while, because prompting, what's the question you're going to ask? Thinking of it as a question you ask is the first mistake, right? It's not just an answer. It's a cognitive, it's a digital brain. I kind of think, if I was to give someone a couple of PhD, of English and history PhDs as an example, as their interns, there would pretty much be an unlimited list of things that, any knowledge worker would use an intern for. They could write a list, 20 pages long. However, you give them a large language model and they're not sure how they can use it, right? If you reframe it as how would I use this PhD intern, there's nothing in the, to the extent it's a cognitive function, they can, the large language models can do it. So we have got to overcome our ability to interact with these digital intelligences, obviously early stages of a form, in a way that's more constructive. So you need to give them much better context. And I don't mean, hey, I'm a partner at PwC. I mean really deep context. And that's where some of those Copilot Studio examples are really powerful. If you give a large language model 2 pages, 5 pages, 10 pages of context, the quality of answer you get will be mind-blowing. Right. And that's where I come back to the example of, if there's 4 or 5 PhDs in a room and the only way you can communicate with them is by slipping notes under the door, you better make sure that note that you slip under the door is as detailed, as helpful as possible, because that's how you'll get a better answer.
I was just thinking as you're talking, like it's almost a bit like a generative AI is great at producing content, for example. So I'm pretty sure we've seen like an influx of content, be it books or, now there'll be more kind of videos created and things like that by generative AI. But it's only as good as the person, like you say, who's doing the prompting, providing the context. So let's say I'm writing an article. I give the AI some prompts, it produces some text. I'm then thinking to myself, but is what it's written good? And then I'm making decisions based on my human kind of view of, no, that's not good enough, it's not detailed enough, or it's too generic, or what have you. So it's almost like that view of what's good, which you're explaining as context, is so important. So like the human actually making that judgment and then, making another prompt to make it even better. It gets better because the human is giving that feedback, isn't it? Which I think
Absolutely.
is what you're saying.
Look, yes, so the human gives the feedback, but even the initial request, if you walked up to a, if you knew there was 100 PhDs walking around the campus of Auckland University and went and asked them a random question, who knows what answer you will get? But if you could give them 5 pages of context, the answer you got from that human PhD would be phenomenally more detailed, right?
Yeah.
And that's where
yeah.
the context we give is so crucial. And also, so you touched on something there about, is it good? Like, is the output good? I think at the current stage of, so whilst these large language models, it is truly extraordinary. I know I keep saying that word, it's extraordinary. I watched Ilya Sutskever, who's the chief scientist of OpenAI. He's on a podcast, and they asked, what's the thing that amazes you the most, right? So the main brains behind ChatGPT, right, and the GPT-4 engine. And his answer was, look, I know you guys might not like this answer. He said, I'm most amazed that they work at all, right? He said, we've got, yes, a hypothesis that a digital version of our brain, that you put data into a learning algorithm and the neural network makes its own pathways and connections, and that should give, an answer that's helpful. He said, I have dealt with neural networks for 20 years and they haven't worked that well. And he said, now that we've got so much data and so much computational power, it's like, wow, they work really, really, really well. And he said that's the bit. And the reason I guess I kind of raised that is that we've discovered this new form of digital intelligence, which is, I find it really cool that the best digital intelligence humans have created is when we've most tried to copy biological intelligence. So the neural networks is, there's lots of different types of machine learning that now's getting trumped by neural networks. But the way we get the best out of it is still with our knowledge. So I find the most powerful use of Gen AI currently is when someone who knows their stuff uses Gen AI to accelerate what they're doing, to your point, right?
Yeah.
So if I need to write an article on Bitcoin, for example, or like to write something on Bitcoin, it is amazing at helping me do that because I know what I want to say. It just helps me say it quicker and easier.
Phrase it. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Whereas I think,
sorry, go.
I just say, whereas I think where Gen AI has still got a slight way to go is, if you are blind to the topic, you'd have to be a little bit careful, right? You got to be a little bit careful because you may not have asked the right question and is the answer verified. But if you know the answer, it's a huge accelerator.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually the birthday card discussion I have with my husband, because I have from time to time used generative AI to write the contents of his birthday card, but I am literally telling the AI the feelings or the expressions of my thoughts, and it's making it pretty. And I sort of have this argument with my husband about whether it's more thoughtful to write a handwritten card that I've just written myself, or whether AI should be involved. But thank you. I think you've taken my side, and I'm going to take that as a win.
I agree with you totally, Hils. And you can say, look, I guess I got a couple of observations on that cool story. One is, well, at least you've signed it off. You say, look, no, but it might have come, but I've signed it off. But I actually think that to be unhappy with that is a little bit like saying, well, that birthday card, the art on the front of it is better than you can draw. So why did you go and buy someone else's art, right? Like ultimately you've chosen ways to project what you would like to say. And there's a whole bunch of ways you do that. And Gen AI is just one way of helping you articulate it. So I'm definitely on Team Hils for that, right?
Awesome. Okay, so you mentioned podcasts before. What are some of the other ways that you keep up to date? Have you got any go-tos or strategies for keeping up with everything when it's all moving so fast?
Definitely digital culture ideas. Digital culture ideas. You've got to listen to Hils Walton. If you haven't seen Hils Walton, you've got to tune into her, right? So that's must watch. After Hils, look, I actually find YouTube is probably the best source because it's the place where you get true leaders in the space, whether it's Sam Altman, Elon Musk, and just be curious and listen to them. I personally find that's the best source, as much as there's a range of places. Honestly, when you see Sam Altman, he did a recent podcast at Stanford University a week ago. You've probably seen that one, Hils. When you see them having Q&As, which are only a few days old, and it's real contemporary insights on where these models are, it is really, really interesting, actually. And on that, there's a really, really, I find it really interesting. There's a point in that interview from 3 or 4 days ago at Stanford that Sam Altman went back there, and the interviewer said, look, GPT-4 is amazing, but when we look to the future, how do you think OpenAI is going to do X, Y, and Z? And Sam says, well, thank you. But firstly, GPT-4 is not amazing. It's mildly embarrassing. And it's the worst model any of you are ever going to have to use, right? And I really think that's such a great way of us level setting this journey we're on, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the worst model we're ever going to have to use, right? So Copilot's the worst it'll ever be today.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
But I do find YouTube and Twitter, the same places that you would probably use, Hils, but YouTube, I think, with just the key thought leaders, it's a really, really good source of info.
Awesome. And I'd like to ask, and I ask most of my guests this, but in terms of apps on your phone, what's on your home screen?
Oh, my home screen. Wow, my home screen's actually, let me have a look. I've got a range of things. I've got all my...
What are you using the most? Is that easier?
Yeah. Well, certainly, I guess Mail, ChatGPT, Copilot. Personally, I'll be honest, CoinStats, because that's all the crypto prices. I've got, and YouTube. It's actually, if you're looking now, it's all pretty simple. It's all the normal stuff. But
sounds very AI and Web3.
that pretty much sums up AI and Web3. You've nailed it, right? AI and Web3.
Awesome. Hey, look, we're finishing up. Sorry, go.
Sorry, I was just going to add one thing on. Do you mind if I add a comment around AI and Web3?
Yeah, sure.
One thing I think that, I often get asked, given in my emerging tech role, digital assets and that whole ecosystem, and now Gen AI being such a, sucking all the oxygen around emerging tech, I really think that they are so complementary to each other. And one of the reasons that I've talked about this is that we are increasingly going to see generative AI, and neural network bots doing things for us. We'll all have our own personal AI in coming months, and who knows how quick that's going to happen. But between Microsoft and the like, they're going to be coming. We are increasingly going to have bots doing things for us now. To prevent a restaurant getting 1,000 fake bookings, they will ask at times for $1, $2, $3, 50 cents to prove that you're not fake. It's a bit like Elon Musk is now getting $1 to have a Twitter account, $1 for a year to kind of prevent the spam bots. Crypto is one of the only ways, the only way that digital value can be exchanged immutably. Right. So I think when we look forward 5 to 10 years, you're going to see Bitcoin and stable coins used by autonomous AI agents to transact on your behalf, whether that's doing some research for you and paying 20 cents to get behind a paywall, whether it's booking a restaurant at a, highly demanded restaurant and you need to put $4 or $20 to save it. Instead of giving the AI your credit card, which potentially will be risky, you'll give it this kind of minimal amount of digital value that you can actually allow it to transact with. So I think you're going to see an increasing merging of the capability of Web3 and also Gen AI.
Kind of as a way to prove you're real or prove you're serious.
Yeah. Because it's value, that's right.
That's fascinating. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Scott. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. As we are finishing up, what is your final take that you kind of want to leave everyone with, or is there anything you're looking forward to next, or what's your final message, I guess?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Hils. It's been really nice, as usual, chatting to you. I think that, I guess my final take would be that I think Gen AI is going to impact society more than most of us realise, even you and I who love it and are, I guess, fortunate enough to see some of the cutting edge advancements being made. I think the fact that cognitive functions now have the ability to be passed on to digital is the creation of digital brains is bigger than most of us can comprehend. I do think we're going to see the first one employer unicorns, for example, because AIs will be doing all the work. But despite how ubiquitous these generative AI models become in society, I think the value of trust and human relationships is just going to go up more and more and more. So I actually think that those things that make us uniquely human, the value of them is going to go up as the value of other things like, I guess, knowledge potentially drops.